The following is a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders Uncommon Masonic Education presentation. This is a clip of material that I share around the country since 2009. It's about 20 or 30 minutes in length. It represents about 20 or 30 minutes out of 6 hours that I normally do when I do a workshop. And it's meant to convey light to the front end workers, the mentors, trainers, coaches, and instructors who are on the front lines and are teaching our next generation and helping them toward betterment. This particular presentation comes out of chapters 12 out of Building Cement and Building Roughish, if there's an interest in looking further into the information being presented. This particular presentation is what to say to candidates when they ask you about Cowans. And I've got the shield, believe it or not, of an organization who is absolutely filled with modern day Cowans. And we're going to have some fun with this. The DSWA stands for something, and at the end, we'll go ahead and reveal what that is. Tonight's presentation, the goals that I have are to show you some background behind the words Cowan and rough and square masons. I'd like to provide also some language and facts that you can be able to use to express your understanding to candidates when they ask you about Cowans. And I'm hoping also that whatever it is that I share with you this evening helps you toward working toward the improvement of your experience of the craft and in your life itself. And when you're seeking light on Cowans, I can tell you that you start out by asking a simple question: what are Cowans? And if you go by the speculative or Freemasonic definition, they'll tell you right up front that these are pretenders to the craft. You can find this definition spewed all over the face of this earth in various forms, but essentially they're not real craft members. They are individuals who are not part of our organization. And hence the job of the tiler is to keep them off, keep Cowans off to prevent them from entering the lodge. However, when you get into some operative research, the stonecrafters prior to the Freemasonic Grand Lodge era, you find a little bit of a different story. You find out that the word Cowan is synonymous with wallers, dry-dykers or drywall dykers, rough builders or rough masons, and even the name Cowaner, the full length word for Cowan. Cowan is shortened, but they're literally their true name is Cowaner, and they shorten it to Cowan just to make it easier to communicate. And we find as we go through the definitions that the Stonecraft offers us, we find that these are free men, they're journeymen, but they're restricted to one class of work. And that class of work is working with unhewn stone and without the use of bonding agents such as lime and cement. In 1808, a guy named Jameson created a dictionary of the Scottish language, and he defined Cowans at that time. And it's really interesting. When I took some clips out of his dictionary, I basically came down to this. It's a term of contempt applied to one who does the work of a mason, but has not been regularly bred. Now that's an interesting thing. At 1808, it's already thought of as a term of contempt in the dictionary dictionary of the Scottish language. It also is used to denote one who builds drywalls, otherwise denominated as a dry-dyker, which is what I had previously stated. And last but not least, it is one unacquainted with the secrets of Freemasonry. So his dictionary actually delves into stating that there is a Freemasonic definition, and the term Cowan refers to one who is unacquainted with the secrets. if you delve enough into the literature, you get the impression from a Freemasonic standpoint that the Cowans were unskilled workers. They were inexperienced. They were untutored, as in they didn't have an apprenticeship of any time served. They were not paid master's wages, and they didn't have the full privileges of the craft. However, if you look at the work of a dry-dyker, a Cowan, you'll notice that although there is no cement, these blocks look pretty professionally laid to build a wall. They're using stringers and posts to make sure that the height is maintained. And it doesn't look like that's going to fall apart anytime soon. But just to give you an idea, here's another Cowan edifice. Here's one that's been around for years, and it doesn't look like it's falling apart. And here's one that has moss growing on it, and it's used as a way of keeping dirt coming down on a country road that looks like it's been there for quite some time. And here's a little bit more modern dry-dyker or Cowan expression. Looks pretty professional to me. And here's a very elaborate dry stone or dry dyke expression by dry-dykers or Cowans. And of course, if we look back several millennia, we'll notice that there's not a stitch of cement here. The blocks are not quite square, but they're put together and they're holding. So it kind of raises the question, it seems to me that they were pretty skilled, pretty experienced, that there's got to be some sort of education going on in order for them to build these huge, long-lasting edifices. And you imagine that they're not going to be paid anything but master's wages if they are rendering works like this, and I'm sure that they have full privileges. So I started looking at some of the history. And back in 1459, what happened is there was an English statute, very similar to the Scottish Cowans that were described. Rough masons or wallers or builders with unhewn stones without lime. And it was considered a lower class of tradesmen according to the wages then fixed. And these were called Cowaners. They were freemen or journeymen restricted to one class of work. However, in 1598, we noticed in the Shaw statutes that they actually banned Cowans in total from working in the lodge. However, in 1707, there was an ordinance, Lodge of Kilwinnie, which described the Cowan as a mason without the word or member of the craft without full privileges. And it had an ordinance against employing Cowans. Yet, the employment of Cowans by master masons for any kind of work when no regular craftsmen could be found within 15 miles was permitted in the early part of the 19th century. So in the 1800s, the early 1800s, it didn't make a difference what that ordinance said. They were employing people because the work had to get done. And in 1600, Glasgow Incorporated of Masons prohibited the employment of Cowans. But in the minutes on February 1623, 23 years later, contains the records of a person booked and received as a Cowan being authorized to work stone and mortar and to build mortar walls, but not above an L's height. Now, an L's height is, the English L was 45 inches in length, and the Scottish was 37.2, just under a meter in height. You know, we're talking about maybe about where the belly button to the chest is in both conditions. Then there was some minutes in the Lodge of Canongate during the 17th century. There's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dates where Cowans were admitted. And they were admitted left and right into this lodge during the 1600s. And the very last entry, a 6th entry, was John Syme, an honest old man and a Cowaner. And he was admitted into that lodge that year. Now, about 100 years later, a stone-dyker, also known as a Cowan, was admitted as an entered apprentice into Stonehaven Lodge, which consisted of operative masons, speculative masons, and one Cowan. Now, 100 years later, that would make it 1788. That would mean, well, we're almost about 70 years into the new Grand Lodge era, and Cowans were being admitted. And back in 1738, Anderson's Constitution laid down that no free and accepted Mason. Now we are talking about Grand Lodge Masonry at this particular point. No free and accepted Mason, aka Freemason, shall work with, be employed by, or teach his trade to a Cowan. At this particular junction, we can pretty well define that a Cowan is not a brother. However, it's interesting to note that these are speculative lodges. There is no building going on. They are literally doing ritual, and their entire existence is to make members. So in the constitutions, it says that no Freemason shall work with, be employed by, or teach his trade to a Cowan. Well, I tell you, this is a head scratcher, because none of this is going on in a Freemasonic lodge. So this can't possibly be something that applies inside the lodge. It must happen outside the lodge. And as we go through, more of this will become evident. So what could possibly be the underlying message that is being communicated by this word Cowan? We know that dry-dykers, drywall dykers, and Cowaners, if we break dry-dyker down, we get dry, which means basically without lime, any kind of bonding agent whatsoever, aka cement. And a dike or wall is an embankment of earth and rock built to prevent floods. Chiefly in the British vernacular, it's a low wall, often of sod, dividing or enclosing lands. And we see these dry dikes all over the British Empire. And in the Scottish definition, under civil engineering, a dike is a wall, especially a dry stone wall. And it's interesting that in Ars Quattro Coronati book, volume 21, I believe it is, starts about page 196 to about 203. In that it says, the truth is that the word Cowan is an exact parallel in use and is the antithesis in meaning to square. Square is an adjective, verb, or noun, and the person who makes a thing square can be called a squarer, aka square mason. Whereas a Cowan means round or hollow. As an adjective, a hollow or something hollow as a noun, and a Cowaner, quite literally, is a person who creates or builds hollows, or the man who uses round unsquared stones to build his edifices, his walls and his huts, using so and thus creating hollows, indents, caverns within the structure itself. Now, I put a clip here from Freeman and Cowan out of AQC, volume 21, page 196, and this is on page 203 where it ends off. I took the clip, but I'll go ahead and expand it. The writer went ahead and got the professional opinion of a professor. And the professor literally said the word cabin, later cabhan, is well-established word in Gaelic literature with a meaning hollow, crevice, etc. In dialect, the sound easily becomes cabin or Cowan. The neat thing about this is that when you look at the Gaelic origins of this word, literally a Cowaner is the builder of hollow stones, or a dry-dyker, which creates hollows as a consequence of the materials and manner to which they build. It's pretty neat stuff. So I go back to my original statement. When I was coming into the craft, I was told that in speculative masonry, as a Freemason, a Cowan means a pretender to the craft. And Cowans are pretenders, according to what I was taught. Now, overlaying this into a symbolic thinking, Cowans were members of the operative craft in many lodges. And so if they were actually members of the operative craft, why are they not allowed to be members of the speculative craft? It makes no sense whatsoever, unless, of course, you recognize that Cowans do not square their work, and they are not trained to make cement. Not only that, but there is a message in that that is screaming very, very loudly. Cowans, when you put it all together, you find out that they are those members of the craft who will not square their work or cultivate cement. Let's get into squaring their work. Basically, they're not into self-improvement. They're not working upon their ashlar, because the whole essence of self-improvement is to work on your ashlar and to bring the ashlar to perfection, which basically means you're squaring your ashlar, getting rid of all the vices and superfluities and making it smooth so that you can raise it and ultimately position it and cement it into that edifice, that house not made by hand, that's called the brotherhood. As far as cement is concerned, that specific bonding material that makes a fellowship one unified whole. So if we apply this to the actual tiler's job, who's supposed to keep off Cowans, it's supposed to redirect their attention not to pretenders of the craft, but those individuals who will not improve themselves, as in square their craft, and or cultivate the bonds of brotherly love and affection. The tiler is not supposed to check dues cards. The tiler is to make sure that anybody comes into the lodge is somebody who actually does work on themselves and is cultivating the bonds. So will this ever occur? Well, it's a symbolic lodge, and we have got to be practical about it. So the tiler's job is basically to check dues cards to make sure that the person coming through the halls is a member. However, it might also be saying something else. It might actually be saying that this is all symbolic, and it's not really about the lodge's tiler, because we should be focusing on the symbolic aspect of what is truly being communicated by these phrases. It's about a personal tiler. It's about our own inner tiler. We are supposed to be keeping focused upon improvement and cultivating bonds with others. So let's go back to that history number 7. As early as 1738, Anderson's Constitution laid down that no free and accepted Mason, aka Freemasons then and now, shall work with, be employed by, or teach his trade to a Cowan. And we assume that means a brother, not a brother, sorry. As far as the trade is concerned, what is the trade? Well, it makes no difference, because we're not really talking about the lodge itself. We're literally saying in that statement symbolically that no Freemason, no member of the craft will work with, be employed by, or teach his trade to men who do not work to improve themselves and who do not work to cultivate the bonds of brotherly love and affection. If you're really going to take the message, you want to make sure that you're working with, that you're employed by, and you're teaching only to those individuals who are dedicated to improving themselves and who are cultivating the bonds of brotherly love and affection.
So this is what you want to say to a brother, a candidate, when he's asking you about Cowans. And what does DSWA stand for? Well, this organization actually is alive and well and kicking around Europe. It's called the Dry Stone Walling Association. And they literally use a common gavel as one of their working tools to shape their stone, not to square it, but shape it so that they can build these wonderful drywall structures all around Europe. And I can tell you that you have Cowans within the craft, both on that side of the pond and also here. When I say the craft, I'm talking about operative masonry. The name is known by the trade, and they are individuals who apprentice under masterful rough masons called Cowans, and they serve a sufficient time as such, and they do get paid master's wages for what it is that they do. However, we are a symbolic lodge, and we apply the symbolism behind the nature of what they do toward our own self-improvement and endeavors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close down the presentation. I'm going to ask you what you got out of the talk, what's your takeaway. What might you be considering doing differently in the future when asked about what a Cowan is? And last but not least, how do you think this information, this light, is going to impact you and others as you carry it with you into the future? And as always, I will be entertaining any questions and thoughts that you might have as we get into the Q&A portion. Once again, if you are interested in the information, the light that I shared with you tonight, these come out of the book Building Cement and Building Roughish. I happen to bring them with me this time. This has been a Brother Asked and Building Better Builders Uncommon Masonic Education presentation. I thank you very much for attending and allowing me to share the light with you. You can find me on Facebook at John S. Nagy and at coach.net. And you will also find me on the YouTube channel called John S. Nagy. Oh, and I also have a blog spot called buildinghiram.blogspot.com if there is an interest. Thank you very much, brothers, and I appreciate your attention.
You've been watching a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.